So Trevor is Watershed Management Group's Restoration Director. He has 35 years of experience in conservation and restoration in the Sonoran Desert and the Sky Island region. Trevor has worked in or on wilderness and roadless area protection, venomous reptiles and endangered species conservation, invasive species eradication, and upland and riparian restoration. There are a few things out there that scare Trevor, but one of them is buffle grass, and he'll definitely be talking about that today. And our guest, Julia Rowe, as well. Julia Rowe, PhD. She is the Invasive Species Program Coordinator at the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum. Julia has been with the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum since 2016. In this role, she coordinates the Sonoran Desert Cooperative Weed Management Area. She also coordinates invasive species control projects with partners around Tucson, gives talks to the public, such as this one, about the dangers of invasive species, and gets to take volunteers into the field to learn up close about buffle grass and fountain grass. Prior to the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum, she studied seabirds and seabird conservation in Hawaii, New Zealand, and Maine, so she's been everywhere. Julia, if you could give us a little bit of background on how it got here and its effect in the Tucson Basin.
Sure. So buffle grass, for being the ubiquitous problem that it is in our Tucson Basin, has actually not even been here in this area for that long. It was planted intentionally in this area in the 30s and 40s. And people continued to plant it a little bit later than that. But it wasn't until the 80s and 90s that people started seeing it spread out of where they had intentionally planted it. So it's been a problem it's only even been here for about 100 years. But you can see when you look up in the Catalinas, there's tens of thousands of acres of buffle grass. In every neighborhood that I've run in Tucson, I see it in the alleyways. It's in all the washes. It's ubiquitous here. So one of the reasons for that is that when it was initially brought over, some scientists were looking for a grass that was really great in heat and really great in drought conditions, because they were having some drought conditions at the time, and they had more cattle on the land than it was able to support. So they were hoping for a miracle grass that they could bring back and breed to be this great cattle grass. So it hasn't really become a great cattle grass. The cattle don't really like it. The bighorn sheep don't like it. But it is really good at the things that they were looking for. It's really drought tolerant. It's really heat tolerant. And the other thing they were looking for was that it could spread easily, so that it would be less effort for them to get it to take over in cattle pastures. So it does all of those things really well. And but yeah, it doesn't really do what it was initially brought over for. So I saw somebody ask just a second ago why it took so long to really spread and take off. And there's a lot of microclimate questions about that, and we're not 100% sure. But there's a graph that people that are in invasive weed science use, that when you have an invasive plant, it goes through a period of not being everywhere, and then it starts at some point. It's a graph that almost all invasive plants take, where it goes like this, right? So it starts off getting a foothold, naturalizing to an area, and then you start this steep curve up. And so right now I have a chart that I show in some presentations. On this standard curve, we're about midway up this curve. So it's not as plentiful as it could possibly be if we let it go and don't do any control, but it is still very, very it's spread everywhere. So there are places that have worse buffle grass problems than we do, but we still have a really big buffle grass problem. People started really forming groups to start dealing with it in 2000. That's when the Tucson or the Sonoran Desert Weed Whackers started, and that's who Trevor was talking about at the beginning. They work over in Tucson Mountain Park, and it's one of the reasons that Tucson Mountain Park looks so good. When you drive over Gates Pass and you see those hillsides that have all that nice natural open space, right? It's thanks to those guys. They're out several times a month, every month, through the summer, through the winter, all the time. And that's the kind of tenacity that buffle grass takes. So just in the last maybe 5 to 10 years, there's been more of a concerted effort, and really in the last 5 years, we've been able to start getting more money and more efforts happening to try and deal with buffle grass. And so as the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum, obviously going out and taking care of all of Pima County and the Tucson Basin is not necessarily part of our job, but conservation and education is part of our job. And so in my role as Invasive Species Coordinator, almost all of my time goes towards dealing with buffle grass and fountain grass, a little bit to other things, but mostly buffle grass. And that is almost entirely because it, except for water, I would say, it is probably our largest conservation concern for the Sonoran Desert. And so why, I guess the next question is, why do we care so much about this one? There's a lot of invasive plants that are here. I could take you out and show you loads of them. There's a lot of plants that are not from here, that are naturalized, and some of these other things, but buffle grass itself is such a big game changer. And that's partially because in a natural Sonoran Desert ecosystem, you have a lot of open space. Can we see that picture from Tucson Mountain Park again? I guess it's harder to see there. I was thinking it was more up close. But in a natural Sonoran Desert ecosystem, you have a lot of open space. And it's yeah, not like that. Is there another one that has, I'm not sure which pictures you have, sorry.
These were the two.
Okay, so the problem is that buffle grass moves into all those nice open spaces, and once it moves in, it does two things. One, it changes the fire regime, because the Sonoran Desert is not evolved to be a fire system, and so the plants don't just sprout back from their roots after a fire happens. And I'm going to talk about that again in just a second. But the other thing that it does is, in this picture that you're looking at right now, even if that never caught on fire, we would still lose the saguaro because it can't come up through that really dense mat that the buffle grass has created. And so it's not just saguaros, it's limberbush and it's brittlebush and it's all the other native plants that grow out there can't recruit through that thick carpet of buffle grass. And so it's sort of this double whammy. It outcompetes the native plants for space and nutrients and water. But the other bigger thing that we've been talking a lot about as the mountains have been on fire is that it changes the fire regime. So what happens is buffle grass actually is a fire evolved grass from an ecosystem that is evolved to have fire. So when a fire happens in this field that we're looking at right now, what would happen is it kills the native plants for the most part, and it burns the buffle grass down to the roots. What happens with the next subsequent rain is that all the buffle grass sprouts back up from those roots, but really, really robust, because it's just gotten this nitrogen boost from the fire too, right? So it's going to be the first thing that comes back in after a fire, because it can come back up from its roots, where the native plants can't do that. And we've seen this time and time again, even in the 4 years that I've been in this job. The fire on A Mountain, do we have any of the pictures from the A Mountain fire in there?
No.
No.
Sorry.
So the fire on A Mountain burned everything down to rock. We had rains, right? It was that 4th of July fire that happened in 2016. We had rains right afterwards, and so the first thing that sprouted up was buffle grass. I was out there doing a study looking at how the saguaro mortality, how the saguaros were impacted by that fire, And so I took pictures over the next couple weeks of the buffle grass out in that area. And within a month, the buffle grass was up to my knee, and it already had seed heads on it. And it was the only green thing in that area. And so in that space, still today, I can drive past a mountain and I can still see the outline of that fire, because the only thing growing in there is buffle grass. And so, to make a long-winded story a little bit shorter, is that it changes, it has the ability within just a couple seasons, or within one season, to change Sonoran Desert ecosystem into an invaded grassland. And so that's a whole ecosystem shift. It's not just replacing a few species, it's changing the entire ecosystem, which comes with a lot more loss of biodiversity.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, that's why it's so important to everything that you're doing and organizing to be able to save the ecosystem that we have now. So what, you mentioned this a little bit with the Sonoran Desert weed whackers, but what other larger efforts are there to control it, and what methods do they use?
So there's, so part of what we do with the cooperative weed management area is we have, there's more than 20 different government agencies, federal, state, county, city, NGOs, like Watershed Management Group, and private citizens that have their own groups, all come together several times a year to talk about, they're all working with buffle grass and other invasives. But we all come together to talk about buffle grass and to learn, from each other ways that we're dealing with this. So some of the big groups that are really doing a lot are Saguaro National Park is really a leader in buffle grass control. They're doing an amazing job. They have volunteers that are trained to go. They're trained like many hours of training. They get a certification that they can go out on their own off trail and dig buffle grass. They have poles that you can sign up with and go out with them and do digs. They don't run the summer, but the rest of the year. And they also have interns every year that go out and both dig and spray it. And they also have the ability to do aerial sprays, which, so for areas that you really, if you guys have done any hiking in Saguaro, there's some places that are really hard to get to. And so they'll go in with a helicopter and spot spray those areas so that you're not going to have the seed bank in the areas that are hard to get to. And they also do a boom sprayer. So for those areas that are just an ocean of buffle grass, they're able to do that. There's also a number of really great citizen groups. So there's one out of Catalina State Park. There's one out of, the Tucson Mountains. There's a group up in the northeastern part. Some of these haven't even given themselves names. Some of them have given themselves names and come up with cool logos and stickers. It's really variable, but there's a lot of people doing a lot of work. We even work with ADOT. They send their guys to learn about best ways to deal with buffle grass and where it's most important, because they don't have the resources to treat it on all their roadways. City of Tucson, so there's a lot of groups that are actually pretty actively involved. It's just such a big, it's such a big issue. And I wanted to say, I'll answer that spray question in just a second. I also wanted to say the other issue with the fire is that it burns really hot. So a buffle grass fire can burn between 14 and 1600 degrees Fahrenheit, and your native plants are typically burning between 400 and 750 degrees. So it's just a really different fire than you would encounter with native grasses or native shrubs and stuff like that. So it's a really big deal. And so that's the other reason why it's really concerning when I see it down all these alleyways too, or along the washes. It's not something you want abutting up against your house.
Right.
But what are they spraying with? They're spraying with glyphosate. Glyphosate is the least toxic, most effective chemical that we can use, and that's standard what people spray with.
Yeah. And we did have an earlier question related to glyphosate with what is the spraying impact on native species?
Glyphosate is a broad spectrum herbicide. And so if you spray something that is not buffle grass, that has like a broadleaf something, it can kill it. But the cool thing about when you have a backpack sprayer on and you're out with your sprayer, it's really easy to spray buffle grass and not spray the thing next to it. I took loads of pictures of this just to show people, a couple weeks after spraying, the dead buffle grass with something like brittle bush right next to it that's still thriving. So it doesn't. The thing that we really like about, and I don't want, we can go down the glyphosate path for hours, but the thing I really do like about it is that it doesn't move through soil. And so some of the other herbicides that people have used in the past move through the soil. And so if you spray a buffle grass plant, it has the potential and likelihood of impacting plants around it. Whereas glyphosate doesn't move through the soil. And so when I spray it on this plant, it stays on that plant, which we really like.
And I just want to add something here, Lauren, on, so we at Watershed Management Group, we don't use herbicides or pesticides at our office. I've never, ever sprayed any herbicides or pesticides in my home in over 30 years in the Broadmoor neighborhood. I don't like chemical herbicides and pesticides. However, I really believe that this is such a crisis. This and the arundo in our riparian areas, there's such a crisis that we don't have any choice but to use the glyphosate in this work. We got to get rid of this, and then we don't have to ever use it again. So I just wanted to put that plug in there because we get asked here at WMG about the use of herbicides a lot. And we don't like it, but we understand we have to use it for these two species in the Tucson Basin.
All right, well, thank you both. Oh, sorry, Julia.
Oh, no, I was just going to echo what Trevor said. It does put me, I also feel similarly about using those sorts of things. And I've spent 20 years as a conservation scientist, which, conservation, right? But so I do find it strange to be in this position of saying the things that I like about this chemical, but it's where we are, and it's what it's really our best choice that we have at this point.
And we do have another question. With the buffle grass that is pulled, whether it's through you all doing it as individuals or those larger groups, it should not be composted then?
So when we are doing digs out in the wildlands, out in the open ecosystem, what we do there is we stack it, and then we, put a rock or two on top of it to keep it from blowing away. There's already a seed bank there, and studies have been done to show that there is no statistical difference in sprouts coming up later, whether you put it in bags and remove it or whether you leave it in place. And so for us, we would really rather not put plastic bags and drag them through the desert. And, half the time we're on these crazy steep inclines. So we leave it in place. But if you're in an urban setting, or, we've done pulls at high schools or along streets where it's not safe to leave it where it is, then we have to bag it and dispose of it. As far as putting it in your compost, I'm not sure how hot compost has to get to kill those seeds, but I would imagine it would have to be really hot because they're, designed to deal with, really high temperatures. But I don't have the scientific answer to that compost question. That's a good one, though. I will have to look into that. So I know that I don't compost things like Bermuda grass myself, and I probably wouldn't put buffle grass in my own compost, but I don't know if it can be.
Yeah, I'll mention, Julia. Yeah, that's a really good point about the heat tolerance of these seeds. because this plant is designed that when it's burning, seeds are being lofted in the air by the hot air columns. So I don't think a regular compost pile would kill the seeds. However, if you're a diligent composter and you need biomass and you want to use it, you just have to be diligent and make sure you're killing any buffle grass that's coming up out of your compost pile. But really a last resort for biomass for compost, I would say.
As an aside, and I don't want to get too sidetracked here, but there's a guy that I'm meeting with next week who collects buffle grass and adds it to, and I don't know how he does it yet because I haven't met with him, but he's been making adobe with it and making walls and, you know, buildings and structures with it. So we're going to go meet with him next week and see how that goes.
Very cool. Yeah, maybe that's a good way to dispose of it once it's been pulled. We'll see.
One of the big invasive species that came out of the nursery trade that Julia works with a lot, and I see a lot in our drainages, and it is highly invasive. It's not as much of a danger as buffle grass is, but that's fountain grass. And I'll let Julia talk to the impacts of fountain grass, but fountain grass was deemed a noxious species along with buffle grass by the Arizona Department of Agriculture, which restricts its ability to be sold. However, the nurserymen have gotten around that by supposedly developing and selling a sterile fountain grass. And fountain grass is just a beautiful ornamental grass, and I really love it. I just don't like seeing it in our washes. So the Department of Agriculture has done a pretty good job, and now with the Sonora Desert Cooperative Weed Management Area working group working on these areas, I think the nursery industry is really becoming aware of what are these highly invasive species that they may be bringing in. I'm not sure, you know, sumac is another one of those highly invasive species that were sold extensively and planted extensively across Tucson and many other areas in the arid Southwest, which I don't think they sell anymore because it is so invasive and such kind of a worthless tree because it really has no wildlife habitat values. But I think Julia can probably talk to that a little bit more.
Yes, and we did get another comment from Amy, thank you. She was referring to the chemical treatment practices in her question.
I still don't completely understand the question, but I guess as far as to try and keep the grass from coming back in once you've gotten rid of it, I don't know why I don't understand the question, but I guess if she's getting at what I think she's getting at, it's that, all right, please consider direct exchange opportunity. Yeah. So one of the standard things that people do if there's an invasive plant is that in any restoration class, you'll learn that you remove the invasive plant and then you plant in the natives to fill that space so that the invasive plant doesn't come back in. But in the case of the Sonoran Desert, it doesn't work like that because we have these natural open spaces. And so there's always going to be that space for it to move into. Oh, like a probiotic. No, so for the chemical, no, I haven't heard of that at all or anybody working on that. I do know that we have at the Desert Museum, we're working with the University of Arizona, looking at trying to come up with non-chemical, essentially non-chemical herbicides by looking at, there's a fungus, and clearly we wouldn't release a fungus, but looking at a fungus that impacts buffle grass in its native range and looking at the toxin that that fungus creates and trying to see if there's any way to make that into an herbicide-like applicant that we could put on there instead of having to use a broad spectrum chemical herbicide. So there's research into that and some other avenues that I mean, we would like to have something better to use, we just don't currently have it. And most of the research money in ag or, in this type of work goes towards, agriculture and not wildlands. So it's a little bit slower than it could be, but we're trying to do as much as we can to help push that process along.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Amy, for your clarification with your question. We do have to move on. We do have a lot to cover with how to identify this species, buffle grass, in congruence with other grasses and in your neighborhood. So I will post up these images. And the first question that I have for you all is just what does it really look like? I know we see these pictures, and is it difficult to identify in out in the, I want to say the wild, but even in our neighborhoods, is it difficult?
So it's interesting. Once you get an eye for it, it seems really obvious. But before you really get a good sense of it, it can be. And actually, even the patch, we're going to show you guys some buffle grass in a minute. And normally, buffle grass grows in a clump. It's a bunch grass that grows in a clump. It's got kind of a messy look. It's got these really telltale, this bottle brush inflorescence where the seeds hang on to. It seems pretty obvious, but this patch we're going to show you actually isn't really growing in a bunch. It's growing it's a bit more leggy, and it almost looks like really aggressive Bermuda grass, but it is buffle grass. So yeah, in the wild it looks like that nice big patch there, or it can be really dried down like this is what it looks like most of the year, as opposed to that, which is what it looks like when it's green. It's one of the first things to green up and one of the first things to brown down. So most of the year it's really brown. Once you get a sense of what that the rachis is what the seeds hang on to. Once you have, once you know what that looks like, and if you can find one of those in your plant, you can know for sure if it's buffle grass or not. But I think really the way to do it is to, when you get a chance, go out on a poll with a group of people, and they know what they're doing, and you can ask a million questions out in the field, which is really awesome. Yeah, see, this is really standard. It's got a nice bunch to it. You can see the bumpy, it's a really hard bumpy rachis. And that's, you get a sense of the golden color it turns when it's brown, but until you really get a chance to touch it and really get to know it, it can look like other things. And we do have, we have 3 other grasses that are the most commonly confused. And in this little booklet, which I think we'll mention later, it has pictures of those other ones with the buffle grass to compare it. Because, you absolutely do not want to go out there and start pulling native grasses. It's less of a problem in the alleys because there's just not as much. But I would never tell somebody just to go out and pull in the Sonoran Desert if they didn't really know what they were doing.
Right, and so when we were advertising this, we did get a note from the Park Service just asking us to remind our viewers tonight that it's illegal to go onto a national park or into Tucson Mountain Park, which is managed by Pima County. It's illegal to go in there and even remove buffle grass unless you're part of an organized group. So we're not advocating just going out into Tucson Mountain Park, Saguaro National Park, the Catalinas, and attacking the buffle grass. We really are encouraging here with our steward in place is to get out into your neighborhood. And even if you don't start pulling it, go out and assess what you think might be the issue out there. I live in the Broadmoor neighborhood, and we're pretty clear of it, but there's some that creeps in along Arroyo Chico, and then there's some that creeps in from Broadway Boulevard. And it's interesting because this has really spread throughout the region. It's been planted extensively in the 30s and 40s, but then how it got its spread into Tucson Mountain Park and Saguaro and the Catalinas really was through roadways. So somebody would go off road, pull off into the median along I-19 and pick some up on their tires or their grill. And then they would drive up into the foothills and park their car at their house, and the seeds would come loose. And that's how it spread to a lot of these areas. But so getting rid of it in the city center kind of takes the pressure off of those popules continually coming out of the city, the urban area, where there's actually more water available for these plants, and they can grow in really dense. I mean, they do really well in the dry desert. Think about alongside a road where there's a lot of extra water ponding, how thick these can get. So dealing with them in the city, and Julia mentioned that ADOT and Pima County Department of Transportation, they have a big problem out there, and they're going to have to spend many millions of dollars to deal with this, but they're dedicated to it and they're going to do it. So
we do have tons of resources that we will definitely discuss later. I think, Trevor, that's in a slide where you discuss where you can report it. And
actually reporting it is really important, because they do have very limited funding. And so the more we report it, the more they realize that it's important and can potentially get more funding from the, Arizona Department of Transportation to do work down here. They realize it's important to people.
Yeah, and I do want to get back to, we just had a question come up that's related to another question that I wanted to ask you all. Oh, gosh. And thank you, Felicia, for posting that booklet. That is another resource that we have for you all, the booklet that Julia showed, that I wanted her to talk a little bit about. And it is free online, and we'll post I believe that is the booklet that she posted about. If not, we will be posting that link a little bit later in this session. But as we talk about how difficult identifying a grass can be, even though it may be easier in the areas that we are, what if we're not sure whether or not we can pull in the area that we're at, and what if we're not sure about whether or not it is buffle grass?
So I actually love this game of what grass is this? So people are always welcome to snap a picture or two and send it to me and ask me. That's probably one of your easier ways to do it. You could always go to the University of Arizona Herbarium. I don't even know, maybe not in COVID times. Yeah, I love getting pictures and questions about whether it's buffle grass or not. And again, just go on a poll and get to know it. Because I have seen, when I've been hiking on trails, I've seen where people have pulled up bristle grass or pulled up tanglehead thinking that it's buffle and trying to be helpful. So yeah, please don't do that.
Yeah, if you're not sure, don't pull it. Take some pictures. Get a picture of the plant like we have on the right side of this slide. Try to get a decent shot of the seed head. When Julia said the rachis, that's the stem that comes up through where all the seeds are. And you can actually see on this picture, and it's super diagnostic, that it's really ridgy. And then there's a few other ones when you have the grass in your hand that gives a positive ID. So learn about how to ID this and what those diagnostics are before you just go out and start pulling. If you see a large infestation in your neighborhood, I would also, before reporting it, I would also encourage people to try to make a positive ID, because if you report it to the city or their county, they're just going to send their contractors out, and the contractors don't know. So they could wipe out a whole stand of tanglehead, the Soteria, which I forget the common name on, the bristle grass. I think that's Soteria is the bristle grass.
Yeah, bristle grass is Soteria.
Okay.
So what is that one of the native grasses that it most resembles?
Yeah, this one I think is one of the most closely, but so it's got the single rachis, but you can see, like, once you take the seeds off, it's not hard and bumpy. And you can see each one of those little individual seeds when you look at it, as opposed to the bottle brush that you see with this one is Buffle, right? So it looks different. And cotton top, I always have people in pulling up cotton top. When you look at those seeds, there's all these little filamentous hairs coming off of it, which you don't have with buffle grass, right?
Like cotton, hence the
yeah,
name.
it looks, when it's got the fluffiness on it, it's more obvious. And then tanglehead just has a similar color at times, but it doesn't have that singular rachis that comes up. It again has all these little filamentous parts that come off of it. So the guide is really helpful to have in your pocket, right? So you can look and remember what the things are with buffle grass. Yes. And take a picture and send it to me.
Those guides are available on that website that I will post in just a little bit. And it's actually time to get them out there.
Mention
but
one more
I think
thing
Lisa's got something to say.
Quickly,
as well.
I just wanted, there are a number of maybe more involved questions that have come in, and I'm wondering, Julia and Trevor, if you'd be willing to stay for 15 minutes after the hour to answer some of these more detailed questions that are coming in.
Yeah, that's fine. And people, again, if I'm not sure if you guys have my email address, if you write to bufflegrass@desertmuseum.org, that comes to me. Or if you write to jrowe@desertmuseum.org. And you can ask me any of these questions tomorrow, or what, I won't answer them tomorrow, but you can ask me any of these questions later too. So I don't mind, I'm happy to talk about it.
Can you repeat that bufflegrass email so I can put it in the chat really quickly?
It's bufflegrass@desertmuseum.org.
Again, I want to mention something about our native grasses. We're sitting right at the eastern edge of the Sonoran Desert, and to the east of us, through the Sonoita Valley, over to Wilcox, down to Douglas, into Mexico, and into New Mexico, we're an ecotone between the Chihuahuan Desert and the Sonoran Desert. And in the Sonoita Valley, you know, which is just 20 miles south and a little bit east of us, there's over 85 species of native grass. The Sonoran Desert has something like 30 or 40 species of native grass. And we're in a really arid situation here. So we want to give all due deference to our native grasses. So I just, again, want to caution people to make sure you have your identification right. Thank you. My last plug.
Thank you,
All right,
Trevor.
we're getting late. We probably need to get out there.
Yes. So let's have you all head out there with Trevor's phone to show us what it really looks like out there.
So here in our neighborhood, and we watch this patch really closely because we've had it come across the street. We're right across Dodge from the Living Lab, and it has shown up in the Living Lab. So we encourage Discount Tire to have, so we're also on a piece of the Discount Tire's property here where the camera's sitting, in a little water harvesting basin that's no longer functional, and they use it for parking. But it had been taken over. I talked to the general manager here, and their contract landscaper got rid of it here. But then we have a private landowner who really doesn't know about it, and so he just lets it go every year. And so we just have to be super diligent. It's also growing in a bunch of rocks. And we all know when you put a bunch of rocks on the ground, that's one of the things we love to do. It holds moisture. And so it's growing up through a bunch of rocks. So it's going to be a little tough to get it out here. But in general, out in the desert, it's very shallow rooted, and it pops out using just a little pickaxe like this. So our tools that we are saying you need out there, and of course the volunteer groups will provide all these: pickaxe, gloves, I would say a long sleeve shirt and a floppy hat, but we're only out here for a few minutes, long pants, boots, and masks.
Yeah, interestingly though, on roads, sometimes on roadsides, shovels actually work. I would never use a shovel in the desert because it's too rocky, but sometimes in alleys, a shovel is better.
Yeah, and when I say shallow rooted, I mean really shallow rooted. There we have it. It's like 1.5 inches in the ground at the most.
But talk about how important it is to get the roots.
Yeah, so we've only gotten part of these roots here, and I don't know how much of this you can see, Lauren.
We can see it really well. If you want to move it a little closer.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect right there.
So this is the root mass, and as you can see right here's the top of the root, or the ground level. So it's just 1.5 inches deep, but these can be quite extensive. And so you want to root around and really get all that stuff up out of the ground, because if it's in the ground and it gets more moisture, it can grow rhizominously. And Julia's going to try to attack this again. So luckily the temperature out here has dropped actually fairly significantly from this afternoon. So it's not too bad a weather to actually be out here and taking some of this out. When you're out here doing this, you're going to get strange looks from your neighbors. Take the time to, oh, here we go. We got a great one here. So that's basically the extent of that bunch grass right there. And again, only 2 inches of the grass. As you can see, it does look a lot like it's Bermuda on steroids.
I'm going to show it far enough back to see the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I did see a question earlier about if some of these tactics work for Bermuda. Not really, because Bermuda does have a much more extensive underground rhizomatous system. So just pulling it a lot of times doesn't work. Look up chicken tractors to get rid of Bermuda grass. It's the most effective way to do it.
Okay, thank you. So we did have a comment that it's great news that it's easy to pull. So how easy was that for you, Julia? I did see you using that pickaxe. So
Yeah, so
do people need something like that all the time, or?
I can step back if you want to drop your mask.
yeah, so it's hard to talk through the this very cute mask, but so it's it can be hard depending on how much rock there is. You always want to have a tool with you because you don't want to just rip it off from the top, right? It's easiest right after a rain because your soil is nice and loose. But you can dig buffle grass any time of year. It's just up to you whether you're willing to be outside.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
So
Well, thank you.
I was going to say, Lauren,
go ahead.
So right now, what Julia described earlier, where when they're out in Tucson Mountain Park or Saguaro National Park, and they get it out of the ground and they just set it down and then put rocks on top of it, that's to hold it in place so it's not rolling down the hillside, spreading seeds around. At this point, I'm just going to go throw this in our trash can because it really doesn't have any seed heads on it. But if you have seed heads and you want to be careful, you don't want to just be walking down the alleyway on the way back to your house, go ahead and have a garbage bag with you and use the garbage bag when you're cleaning your alleys out.
That's
with
a good
this
point.
stuff.
The other point I want to make is that you're going to have a seed bank in whatever area that you dig, or if for whatever reason you go spray when it's green, either way, there's a seed bank there. And so when it rains again, it's going to sprout up for multiple more seasons of rain. So you remove it once, which is great. It's a good start, but you need to be tenacious about it.
It's being very diligent. And I think that was one of the benefits of doing removing during this time is that there are little to no seed heads. Am I right?
Yeah, for sure. The little bit that's on there at this point probably does not have fertile seeds in it anyway. Right.
And we do have one more question before we do a little bit of wrap up and talk about the opportunities for everyone to do this individually and as a group. Should we spray the ground where you remove the buffle grass?
No. Spray not with. I guess either way, whether she's talking about water or glyphosate. No, because the glyphosate can only be sprayed on actively growing plants. If you spray it on a plant that's not actively growing, it doesn't do any good. It has to be growing to pull that chemical into its system. So it's not a pre-emergent, so it wouldn't kill any seeds.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you.
I just want to add to that, just so for clarity, that for manual, what we're recommending in our neighborhoods is manual removal.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy. We're not asking people to go out and spray. We're recommending you go out and do manual removal.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is our alleyways and our little greenways that go through our neighborhoods are also home to some really kind of rare Sonoran desert species, such as the little tree lizard, a whole host of toads that only come out in the monsoons, horned lizards. And because this may be some of the only vegetation in an alleyway, that's where these critters are going to be hanging out. So definitely I encourage, do not spray this stuff anywhere.
And it's not like it's, I mean, like they have to do it in the Forest Service and National Park because we're talking about tens of thousands of acres.
Right.
An alleyway is not going to be that kind of scale.
You know, and if it's too big for you to get out of your alleyway by yourself, enlist the help of your neighbors. Let's do some education with our neighborhood associations, with our homeowners associations, with your friends and family about the real threat of this, and get all your neighbors out. And let's do some buffle grass pulls in our neighborhood.
And I think to that point, I think Lauren was going to mention that the Desert Museum offers people like myself to come out and talk to your neighborhood group, your HOA, whatever. So I've even gone and helped people with their first pull just to make sure they know what they're doing. So.
Great. Yes, thank you both. And as we are wrapping up, it is 7 o'clock, so thank you all as Trevor and Julia go back inside to continue answering the questions that we had earlier. I wanted to thank you both, Julia and Trevor, for all of the knowledge that you've brought to us today. And I wanted to mention again our dispersed poll that we are doing tomorrow. So I did put that link in the chat, and I will do it again. I think I've got it up. Yes. So you are welcome to sign up for that and take action with us dispersed tomorrow in your own local area, in your own neighborhood. So I hope to see you all and get some images and descriptions from that. That would be great to see. And Julia is, she might talk about this a little bit. I do have a slide related to that and a link again for her. There we go. So this is their website, and they do have organized buffle grass pulls that they are doing. Let me open the chat box and stop sharing. And I can post that link to, if you are interested in joining one of those. Oh my goodness, there we go. And she did discuss with me, they are doing social distancing, and you are encouraged to wear masks while you are doing that. So if you are interested in joining one of them.
So are you talking about the Pima County polls?
Yes, the ones that are on your website. I'm trying to look for that. There it is.
Yeah, so it's through Pima County, and those are in Tucson Mountain Park. And yeah, they're disinfecting the tools between every use, and they're encouraging people to bring your own gloves. But if you don't have gloves, they will give you a pair that you then take home, because they're trying to, they're going through as many measures to have people out there, be socially distanced, and still continue the work.